Hi everyone, welcome to another presentation. This time we're going to be talking about Learning Target 5, how the international community responds to genocide. When you evaluate these different options, I want you to be considering a lot of different questions. First, how expensive is this option in terms of money and lives? And not just lives of the people who are there, but also our own troops as well. R being the international community, the US, whoever's involved. How likely is this option to bring a stop to the genocide? How quickly or slowly is this option likely to bring a stop to the genocide? How likely is the option to provide help for the people who are being targeted? And how likely is this option to create a greater conflict? Now, all these questions you have on your sheet, I want you to be thinking about these as you're writing down some of the advantages and disadvantages, considering is this option an advantage or disadvantage based on some of this criteria that you see on this slide and on your sheets in front of you. Now, if this sounds familiar, if these options sound familiar to you, it's because we've covered a lot of these when we talk about foreign policy and the international community. So some of these should be very similar just now within the context of genocide. Our first option is use of military force. A lot of you, if you recall, back to the international community, felt that this was, in foreign policy unit, that this was the best option because it was the most complete, it got the most done. Well, that might be true and it might not be true. That's something for you to determine in your advantages and disadvantages table. This is when member countries put together an army and invade, forcing them to stop this genocide. So Allied forces, US, Britain, etc. during World War II, the NATO bombings of Bosnia during the Bosnian genocide, these are actions that were taken using military force to stop a genocide. Now, remember, the international community on its own, like the UN, do they have a military? That's right, they do not. They use the member countries' militaries in order for this to occur. Option 2, use of peacekeeping troops. You see a nice picture here of the UN flag, blue with the world in it. Member countries can put together a peacekeeping force designed to enforce a treaty or protect citizens. Now, this might sound similar to the military force, except they are not armed very much, and they have direct orders not to fire. They cannot fire unless they're fired upon. So it doesn't matter what they see, it doesn't matter what's happening, they cannot fire unless they're fired upon. So Bosnia, Rwanda, for example, these are places in which genocide was occurring where peacekeeping troops were put there. Now, how effective or not effective they were, well, that's up for you to determine and hopefully find out about as we go and cover more of these genocides. Option 3 is humanitarian aid. Here's some great photos of some international community groups working, different kind of NGOs in the international world, offering humanitarian aid around the world. So this is when member countries can establish, fund, supply, and operate refugee camps for those victimized by the genocide. So Rwanda and Darfur, which is in Sudan, which is in Africa, are great examples in which we see this occur. So these groups go, they provide humanitarian aid to help the people who are suffering from genocide. Another option is sanctions. This, again, you might recall this from our foreign policy unit. Member states can cut off economic aid or refuse to trade with the offending country. Darfur, for example, Iraq, where the US froze a lot of financial assets of these governments in order to get them to stop committing a genocide. Now, we've had sanctions in Cuba for a while. A lot of people think that what's happening in Cuba, because of how they violate human rights, might be a genocide. Well, that's up for you to determine based on what you know about the definition of genocide. But the US has pressured Cuba to try and change their human rights policies to make them more modern and more accepting, perhaps even adopting the UDHR. And again, a policy then would be then the trade-off could be that we would lift sanctions as we're starting to do more and more as we get better relations with Cuba. Condemnation is when member states can make a forceful public statement against the action. So they come out in public and say, you know, we see what you're doing over there. We really don't like what you're doing. You probably should stop. And sometimes it can even go as far as to be, listen, we really don't like what you're doing. And if you don't stop, we're going to further intervene, whether that's military force, put troops on the ground in terms of the peaceful troops, peacekeeping troops, or some other action to step in if this genocide doesn't stop. So again, Iraq and Sudan are great examples of this. Our last option, as you might be familiar with, and again, this is an option just like it was in our Unit 3 on foreign policy, is taking no action. You can see it's been used in a lot of different examples: Armenia, Ukraine, Cambodia, and Rwanda. And this is when member countries don't do anything. Now, that can be deliberate, or it can be, well, we just don't really know what to do yet. And if you think back to our definition of genocide about, do they really want to intervene if it's a civil war? Do they really want to intervene at all? Is it within their national interest to intervene? Because remember, that's still part of the conversation. This is a option that a lot of member countries have to think about before they go and intervene in a genocide. Even if morally they know they should, remember the reasons why countries interact and intervene and why they don't. So hopefully you've been taking notes on the advantages and disadvantages, keeping in mind all these things that you see here and on your sheets, and be ready to go for tomorrow's activity. Have a great day.